Welcome everyone to this special event, and we're looking at pathways, dyslexia, and neuro-inclusion in the workplace. Next slide, please. My name's Jeanette Beetham. I think it's useful to explain who I am and a bit about my background, as I've been invited here to talk about potential barriers to neuro-inclusion in the workplace and some options to help us forge forward with that. My background is as a business counsellor, as a consultant and trainer for over 20 years, working across all sectors, both working one-to-one with individuals, delivering specialist training and support, as well as being involved in developing the national professional standards for workplace needs assessors and support providers. I started Right Resources Limited probably about 12, 14 years ago. I've lost track now. And during that time, I've developed a range of accredited training programs really tailored to fit the needs as I could see them within the workplace. Also, I've worked with a number of organisations across all sectors, but one of those is as a staff dyslexia and neurodivergent conditions consultant at Imperial College. So working very much within STEM and working with people at all levels within an organisation. Next slide, please. An overview of the session is I'm going to look at the dyslexic neurodivergent individuals and the significance of psychological safety in the workplace. Also look at challenges for line managers and the organisation overall, and then explore some possible ways forward. Next slide, please. I have no connection with Arup, but I thought this was a really nice image, so I thought I'd include this as we start looking at the individual and psychological safety. Some common challenges in the workplace facing neurodivergent individuals, and these are taken from workplace needs assessments that we've done, myself and my colleagues. Challenges like organisation, planning and prioritising, computer filing, memory and concentration, relationships, diary management, spelling and grammar, effective engagement in meetings, overload and overwhelm. That's a word that is so commonly used by individuals that we're working with. Email management, challenges with focus and being easily distracted, note-taking challenges, structuring written communications, presenting information, time management, sensory issues, social and communication, stress and anxiety. And you'll notice here a big part of this is change. Change can be a trigger for somebody not coping quite so well. And that can be a change of line manager, change of role, change of processes, etc. But we have to remember that there are also strengths associated with being dyslexic, neurodivergent. And those strengths include creativity, problem solving. And by creativity, I mean creative thinking, as well as the more sort of creative in the arts, as it were, entrepreneurial flair, big picture thinking, communication when someone feels confident to do so, visualization skills, spatial awareness, when that's not overlapped with dyspraxia or developmental coordination disorder, of course, and determination. And when we're looking at this, neurodiversity, there's a lot of confusion over what the word actually means, but it relates to all of us. Just as if you have an open and accessible recruitment policy, you will have a culturally diverse workforce, we will all have a neurodiverse workforce. And whilst we're focusing mostly on dyslexia, we have to consider that overlap is the rule rather than the exception. So I haven't met a single person with a dyslexia profile who doesn't have traits and characteristics commonly associated with other neurodivergent conditions. We're talking about 1 in 8 of the population who are neurodivergent. It could be as high as 1 in 6. So it is huge. We're talking about a lot of people. Next slide, please. And when we're working with neurodivergent individuals, we need to take a person-centered approach because every person is unique. And we need to handle with care because quite often people are fearful of reaching out for support. You could say that they're camouflaging, they're almost trying not to be noticed, or they're masking and putting on a happy smiley face, but actually underneath what's happening is they're struggling. And that can be exhausting. So it's definitely not a one size fits all. Next slide, please. So the additional challenges for the dyslexic/neurodivergent individual are that, they may wonder, are the challenges that I'm experiencing associated with dyslexia or other neurodivergent condition? Where can I go to find out? Will this affect my career? Is help available? How do I access support? What would a program of specialist support look like? And more importantly, or the underlining here, is who will need to know, because people feel quite vulnerable. There will be concerns about bullying and the negative impact it might have on their career progression. And they may have had possible negative past experiences, either in education or in the workplace. Next slide, please. People need to feel safe, and psychological safety is essential, not only if we want people to feel able to talk about challenges, but also if we want to help them optimize their potential. Next slide, please. When we're talking about psychological safety, it's a condition which has 4 levels. And the first level is inclusion safety, and that's a human right. Everyone should feel included. The second level is learner safety, and this is really where, being neurodivergent, this is where it comes in. You should feel safe to learn, feel safe not to know, feel safe to be able to reach out for additional support if you need it. The third level is contributor safety. You should feel safe to be able to contribute your ideas, your thoughts, and with your colleagues. And the fourth one, and this is the really interesting one, is the challenger safety. Challenge the status quo. That means that if you feel things can be done better, or if you feel that what's happening is unsafe, for example, you should feel safe to be able to challenge the status quo without being marginalised or punished in any way. But we have to have 1, 2, and 3 before we can get to 4. So overall, for an organisation, psychological safety is important. Next slide, please. In the area that we're looking at in engineering, it's especially important because level 4 is where innovation happens. It's also about minimising and mitigating any risk and avoiding risk, because we need people to feel safe to challenge the situation that's currently happening. Next slide, please. Thinking differently brings new ideas to life. As we know, everything man-made starts with an idea in the brain. And we need talented individuals who think differently and who can manipulate components to achieve the incredible. An optimistic mindset is geared towards growth and more readily able to recognise opportunities. So a workplace culture that is supportive and accessible is more likely to generate ideas and solutions much needed in today's world. Next slide, please. The challenges for the organisation are many. So next slide, please. So for line managers, they may think, is this a capability issue when someone's struggling? Should I know what to do? Well, if we think about initial teacher training, for example, dyslexia, let alone any other neurodivergent condition, is not taught explicitly. So they don't spend a lot of time focusing on dyslexia, for example. So if teachers don't know, unless they've done additional training, how on earth do line managers know? So should I know? Well, if you've done some training, yes. HR, should I signpost to occupational health? Unfortunately, occupational health is quite often seen as a catch-all for everything. But are they specialised in looking at neurodivergent conditions? If someone is neurodivergent and they're struggling, then it becomes a mental health issue, then it's more likely to be a health issue. and HR wondering whether we are meeting our legal obligations. So insightful leaders, they may be thinking, how can we optimise potential of our neurodiverse workforce? And what steps do we need to take to promote a workplace culture that attracts and retains individuals who can conceive, design, implement and operate innovative products and services? Next slide, please. A lunch and learn awareness is not enough. We need an organisation-wide approach, and we need a step-by-step approach. And there are key players within the organisation who need specific training and guidance. For example, senior leaders, the decision makers who are looking at the information infrastructure and policy, for example. HR and occupational health, line managers, they need to know how to be more inclusive in the way that they operate. Trainers, how to be accessible in the training delivery so they maximise the potential of a training opportunity for everybody. Staff networks, making them more than just a talking shop, ensuring that actually they can have a proactive approach and signpost people to things that are useful, and all staff to have awareness training generally. We need a process and consistent approach that's shared and promoted to ensure everyone is aware. Next slide, please. Neurodiversity related training for those in key roles should be accurate, comprehensive and useful. Otherwise, there's no point in doing it. And I believe, as Harvey Bloom said in the Atlantic magazine, that neurodiversity could be as important and crucial for human race as biodiversity is for life in general. The next slide briefly shows you what a process of support should look like and should include. And you'll notice in here, the one part that is in red is a diagnostic assessment. We don't need a diagnostic assessment to be able to apply for a workplace needs assessment. For some people who are doing professional qualifications, they may need a diagnostic assessment as proof, for example, for the education boards, etc. Or where there are more complex issues, or when a person wants to find out from themselves about their diagnosis. But otherwise, a screening and workplace needs assessment is quite sufficient to move somebody forward. Next slide, please. So exploring possible ways forward. In my work, as I say, I've seen where the gaps are, and we've developed a suite of accredited training. So for senior leaders and the decision makers looking at infrastructure, we've got a level 4 training program called Neurodiversity Aware. We've worked with several police forces, for example, as well as people in a whole host of different organisations, including Admiral, who I know are one of the top employers in the UK, had various awards, etc. HR and occupational health, they may want to do the neurodiversity workplace needs assessor training, because we need to ensure that workplace needs assessments are undertaken by knowledgeable people who will look at this as a person-centred approach and take enough time with the individual to make sure that the adjustments are actually tailored to their needs rather than just a standard prescription. And even if they don't want to actually carry out the workplace needs assessments themselves, for them to have an understanding of what the components are of a comprehensive workplace needs assessment, they may decide that that type of training is useful. Line managers, supervisors and trainers, neuro-inclusive practice, that's fairly straightforward what that covers, but it's also about being more neuro-inclusive and more accessible in our training and our communication. And staff networks and union reps, a level 2 qualification, where we have workplace neurodiversity champions, where they make it safe to be able to speak to somebody, receive accurate information, some hints and tips, and be able to make more informed choices about whether to seek support or not. And then all staff should have accurate awareness training. So I was delighted to be invited to speak to you all today. These are ways that we have developed to be able to look at a process for workplace support for neurodiversity and ensure that organisations are equipped to move people forward and get the best from their staff. Next slide, please. So that we can mitigate the weaknesses and challenges and optimize the strengths and produce a neuro-inclusive workplace culture. In the words of Mushtaq al-Atabi, nurturing a positive growth-inclined mindset is very necessary for success, both professionally and in a person's life at large. So just to review, we've looked at the neurodivergent individual, briefly looked at some of the specific related challenges to some sort of job tasks, but also the challenges of actually getting somebody to feel comfortable about reaching out for support when they need it. Also the fact of acknowledging that there are challenges for other people within the organisation, and that tailored support is probably more likely to be the most effective way forward. And that really, last slide, these are just some of the training programs that we deliver. So at lightning speed, I have gone through that presentation, and thank you very much for listening.
Thank you. Let's unmute myself. Can you hear me?
I can hear you, yes. Thank you.
That's good. So first of all, thanks very much, Jeanette, for taking the reins when for the first time ever, the host link disappeared at the moment of intro, and I thought I was going to be looking at some friendly faces, and all I could see was a blank screen. So you've done very well, having to react on the hoof as much as anything else. So thanks for that.
Well, thank you very much. I was unsure what to do, but I thought, well, let's just carry on.
There's nothing more reassuring than than frantically trying to link back in and finding that you're introducing yourself. So what I was going to say was we're thrilled to have one of the leading consultants in the space, and there you are. So thanks very much for that. I'll sort of do some more intros on as we go along, but I thought we'd ask you a few questions. You've been doing this for a while now. Do you think progress is being made? It feels like progress is being made. What's your assessment of how we're doing as employers with neuro inclusivity?
I think we're making progress now. I think it's been slow. It felt like wading through treacle to start with. But yes, we are definitely making progress. There's a lot of misinformation, a lot where people are perhaps sharing their own stories, which is useful, and it can be cathartic for them to share, because quite often people have had some negative experiences, and if they're starting to feel confident to be able to share that with other people, I think it can be really helpful. However, we need to understand that that's just one person's experience, one person's story, because every brain is different. Some brains are more different than others, and then we are talking about neurodivergent individuals, but also each person who is neurodivergent is unique. So you could have a room of 50 people who are dyslexic, even all doing a very similar job, but their challenges will be unique to them because of their education, their background, personal background, their experiences, their unique processing. So we really do need to take a person-centered approach rather than a one-size-fits-all. Unfortunately, what we had historically was we would have a workplace needs assessment done by somebody who wasn't necessarily as knowledgeable as they could be about dyslexia, and they would give somebody a standard prescription, as it were, of various bits of software, but not really understand what the challenges were with that individual or are with that individual, and not necessarily helping them integrate that software into their day-to-day tasks to help them perform more effectively. So we are moving forward, and it's a delight to see. But I think when we're looking at information around neurodiversity, we need to go to those reliable, trusted sources rather than looking at social media.
Thanks. So before we move over to the panel for the organisations, which you'll also be joining, I thought I'd just ask on behalf of perhaps the smaller companies that might be watching and line managers, what would you advise as the best first step if you're working alongside or with someone who's neurodivergent? What would a business do?
I think awareness is key. Awareness is so important, and if you've got a group of 5 of you, for example, I mean, my experience, I've worked with small, medium, and large organisations as a business advisor, so I do understand, the challenges facing the smaller businesses too. But if we look on this as CPD, if we look on this as something that really we should be doing, if we're looking at could be as high as 1 in 6 of the population. If we got 5 of us, it may be 1 of us, let's put it that way. So if I should have said 6, really, it's probably, if there's 6 of us, it may be 1 of us, okay? But it's not just about the team. It's not about inward looking. It's about how our interface with the public and our customers, because that's 1 in 6 or 1 in 8 of our clients and our customers. So it can actually improve our communication. It's also about our suppliers, the B2B stuff as well. So if we can make things, if we have a greater awareness, if we can make things more accessible, then it's actually better for everybody. Because quite often, some of the adjustments that we make, especially to communication, makes it so much better for everyone. So we can start small, and the most important thing is to have the will and the intention to move forward. So as they say, the most difficult thing is the first step. And awareness is the first step, but making sure that you have someone who is knowledgeable, not someone who is sharing their personal experience mixed with a more broader understanding, that's perfectly fine. But ensure that, when we have training, there's a cost to it, not only financial, but the time involved, but also if it's inaccurate, there's a cost to it as well. So it's an investment for the future, and it should be done as general CPD.
Excellent. That's that will segue us nicely into our first panel, which you'll also be joining, as I mentioned, which is our organisations and employers panel, when we're going to hear a little bit about what some of you have been doing to accommodate neurodiversity. What I'm going to do is, or what in fact Julia in the back office is going to do, is going to welcome onto the virtual stage Ben Jones from the Engineering Council, Laura Norton from the IET, Natasha Whitehurst from Rolls-Royce. And let's hear from them one at a time, and I've promised them it will be in alphabetical order. So if you want to introduce yourself and then just give us a little flavour each of what you've been doing in your various organisations. So according to my view of alphabet, it's Ben, Laura and Natasha. So Ben, if you'd like to go first. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Andrew. Thanks very much for inviting me, and good afternoon, everybody. I'm Ben Jones. I've been working at the Engineering Council for about 11 years. I work in the standards team. Our job within the organisation is to look after the professional standard for the engineering profession. So, looked at another way, the standard you would be measured against to become chartered, incorporated engineer or engineering technician. So the standard itself is the threshold that you need to meet to get one of those professional titles. What we've been looking at in the very recent past, I think the reason that I've been invited onto this panel, is how can we make professional registration, chartership, less onerous for neurodivergent practicing engineers. That's the work that we've been doing recently. I'm sure we'll talk about that a little bit later on, but that's me and that's why I'm here. Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you. So Laura.
I'm Laura Norton. I'm the Head of Equality, Diversity and Inclusion at the Institution of Engineering and Technology, or the IET. We're one of the largest professional bodies for engineers. And ED&I is really core to our values and beliefs. It runs throughout our strategy. And we're really trying to build an inclusive culture for all of our members, volunteers, colleagues, and the wider engineering and technology community. Really wanting everybody to be able to fulfill their potential and feel that they belong in engineering and technology. That together we can advance excellence in engineering a better world. And one huge part of that is our work on neurodiversity. So back in 2015, I think, conversations first started with some of our members around setting up what at the time we called a dyslexia focus group, which is now more broadly our neurodiversity member network. And they act as a peer-to-peer support group, supporting each other. We have some members who are joining some of the panels here today, but they're also very proactive in helping us, the IET, to improve our practices and processes. Much of that has been around professional registration that Ben has just talked about, ensuring that we're making adjustments throughout the process, that we are working with individuals on a case-by-case basis, making sure that people talk to us about their needs. We've learned an awful lot, made a lot of adjustments along the way, and have worked closely now with Ben and the Engineering Council in order to ensure that the process of professional registration is as inclusive as possible. We also have some research that we've been working on over the last few months. We did a survey back in last year where 19% of our volunteers identified as definitely or possibly neurodivergent, and that spurred us on to do a large-scale piece of research to build our understanding and awareness of the lived experience of neurodiverse engineers and technicians, but also to make recommendations to employers, to organisations, to line managers, what we can do to improve and ensure we are as inclusive as possible in the workplace, but also commitments of things we, the IET, will change ourselves and what we can do better as well to improve inclusion. We might talk a little bit more about that through some of the questions.
Okay, great. Let's move to Natasha then. So we home in on an organisation, quite a big organisation like Rolls-Royce, but what's the process been for you with neuro-inclusion?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. So I'm Natasha Whitehurst. My pronouns are she, her, and I lead inclusion and diversity here at Rolls-Royce. So in terms of Rolls-Royce, in case anybody is unfamiliar, we develop and deliver complex power and propulsion solutions, and that's in the air, at sea, and on land. Just to give you a kind of, I think we've alluded to it, but in terms of size and scale, so we're in 49 countries and we've got about 44,000 employees. So there's quite a lot of people to bring on the journey as we go. If we think about what we've been doing, so we have kind of very clear ambitions around inclusion and diversity. And I guess from an inclusion perspective, we want every person to feel that they belong at Rolls-Royce. We want every person to feel that experience of connection, security and community, and so that they can speak up freely. And I guess a big part of being able to speak up freely is having that psychological safety, as Jeanette alluded to, that you can talk about your neurodivergence. I don't think I talked about it at the beginning. I myself am neurodivergent. It's one of the many things that make me me. And so actually it's really important that we create that place of safety that people can share and talk about that. From a diversity perspective, we know that the richness and the innovation and the everything basically that comes from having that kind of diverse workforce. And so we really want to be representative of the local societies in which we're working with. So what have we done to date? Well, I guess for us, we too take that very person-centric approach at Rolls-Royce, and neurodiversity has played a big part of our activity this year. We've got two very well-established employee networks, which have got chapters in the UK and the US, with a big focus, like I say, on neurodiversity. And we've got active executive sponsorship, so very senior leaders who are very supportive, actively within events, speaking, but also elevating the focus on neurodiversity. And raising awareness is key and remains key, because that's how we then use those opportunities to educate our leaders, who are pivotal in that person-centric approach. We also use storytelling as a great way for people to understand and kind of share experience right the way across the organisation. I think the biggest thing is that, like I say, with our size and scale, we've got different people, different countries at kind of different stages of their understanding. And so actually one of the things that we did to kind of create that baseline foundation this year, we launched our neurodiversity toolkit, and that went globally to support that activity. One of the other things that we've done this year is we've supported some research. So neurodiversity in business, in conjunction with Birkbeck University, we did some research around neurodiversity in business. There was over 10,000 people who took part.
Natasha's just frozen on us.
There was about 100.
Sorry, you've just frozen a little there, Natasha. So maybe just tell us about the survey again. We're clearly having some issues with the internet today. Natasha's just gone dark. People are dropping out left, right, and centre. Laura, you're still there, which is good. What I was going to say, I'm going to busk a little here, and hopefully we'll get everybody back at the same time. And what I would have done had I, which is why we're holding the webinar today, but specifically today we're holding it because it's Engineering in Dyslexia Day, and this whole webinar has been curated for us by the Engineering Differently group, which is a group that was formed in 2020, and I'm very pleased to have been there at the beginning of it. Engineering, does it attract neurodivergent individuals specifically, or is it just reflective of the population, do you think? What's it been from your experience?
So I think that's a tricky one to answer, Andrew. I think, as Jeanette said, we now know that 1 in 8 people are likely to be neurodiverse. Possibly that's 1 in 6, as Jeanette said. I just shared with you there one of the statistics from a piece of research we did last year with our volunteers, and that was 20%, 19% of people identified as definitely or possibly neurodivergent. There isn't an awful lot of data yet available on the extent of neurodiversity directly within employment in engineering and technology, and that's partly one of the reasons behind the piece of research that we've done. But I think it's evident that many of the benefits that people talk about are the skills that we use as engineers, are the skills that we need to engineer a better world. In the piece of research that we've been doing recently at the IET, talking to our members about their lived experience, challenges that they face daily, but also the benefits that they bring to the sector. People have spoken about some of the, I guess, more stereotypical things that we hear around creativity, invention, being able to process vast amounts of data at any one time. But people have also talked about things that we might think of less stereotypically. People have talked about being empathetic, really understanding others. People have talked about resilience and team working. There are so many benefits, and I think, as Jeanette said earlier, everybody's strengths are different, and we need not all people, certainly not all neurodivergent people display those same strengths. So we need to be careful not to labels on people.
Yeah, it's not one size fits all in any sense, is it?
Yeah, not at all. And some of the people that we have spoken to in our research have talked about not necessarily wanting to be seen as a fantastic engineer because of their neurodiversity. They are just good at their job. But we do have to recognise, I think, that some of those skills that really do help us to engineer a better world are ones that are often that people often find are associated with, or they may put down to, this is part of me, this is part of my neurodiversity. So there may be a link there, but I think that's a hard question for us to answer.
I'm going to ask the same question to the group at the next panel anyway. But I'm glad we're talking about surveys, and Natasha was in the midst of telling us about her survey when she also disappeared. It's obviously one of those days. There's something out there in the ether, I think, some static or something somewhere. So do you want to just tell us, because you started breaking up as you said you'd done a survey, so we didn't hear much detail. So do you want to just tell us about the survey?
Yeah, definitely. We actually conducted some research with Neurodiversity in Business and Birkbeck University, and so that was with a UK lens. But we had over 10,000, or well, over 11,000 people took part in that research. There was over almost 130 employers were involved. And actually, that was really, really fascinating. But we knew that was important for us to kind of get that insight, so that we could, whilst it was with a UK lens, actually there was quite a lot of learning that we could apply globally. I think one of the biggest things that I took away from that, and it's out there for people to read, was that 65% of employees fear discrimination from management. And actually, I think we forget the role that leaders, people leaders have in creating a place where people can come to work and be themselves. And I think they're pivotal in the journey of neuro-inclusion, in giving them that understanding, but also really leading.
Thanks. And now Ben's rejoined us as well. So I can ask him the same question. We're just talking about engineering in general and about the experiences of whether engineering is attracting the neurodiverse or whether it's just reflective of the population. I think there's definitely, I think we'll hear a bit later as well, that there are definite areas which play well to the strengths. But how have your members viewed it? You appear to be muted. Is that you, or is that an external muting? I wonder. We're having all kinds of difficulties. Ben's talking away, but we can't hear him.
Talking away.
Oh, there we go. Now you're on green. That's all right.
Okay.
So
Thank you, Julia.
Again.
Okay. All right. The first thing I'll say is to echo what Laura said. We do have a dearth of quantitative data here. We hold the UK register of registered engineers, chartered engineers, incorporated engineers, and engineering technicians, and there's the best part of 250,000 of them in the UK and overseas. We have data on gender, reported gender, and we know that there's work that needs to be done there. But it really stops there. Socioeconomic background, educational level, ethnicity, and of course, neurodivergence is not something that we have historically collected data on. But what we lack there in the quantitative data, I think we make up for in qualitative and anecdotal. Laura and the IT, and of course Stephen Gill, who will be on the next panel, form part of the working group for the project that I mentioned a little earlier. But we've consulted very widely with our institutions, the engineering institutions. Now the IET is one of around 40 of those. So, it covers the entire breadth, the footprint of engineering in the UK. We consulted with all of them. And what I can say is that every respondent from every institution either has lived experience or has a colleague or has a family member, who is in those categories that we've been talking about so far. So anecdotally and qualitatively, we learned an enormous amount about the UK engineering population. And I think that, we can't say with any statistical absolute certainty, but beyond that, I think it is absolutely fair to say that neurodivergent people are likely to be overrepresented in the UK engineering profession compared to the population as a whole. That's why I think that the project that we've been working on to make professional registration more generally accessible is extremely vital, and the same is true of the the work and the research that Laura and the IT have been doing.
Great. I'm going to bring Jeanette in there because on my screen she's a much smaller picture, and I don't want to overlook her just because her picture is smaller. What's your experience? So, are there any particular sort of areas that the engineering folk that you've dealt with that makes things easier I shouldn't even use the phrase makes things easier, accommodates better the neurodivergent? Are there steps, particular steps for engineers or particular areas for engineers, do you think? Is it about more visual information? Is that a key?
Well, visual, yes, definitely. I mean, it's interesting, you know, when we do the research and we ask these questions, we have to bear in mind we don't know who is neurodivergent, because a lot of people won't know that they are until they encounter some kind of challenge, and usually that follows some kind of change, either promotion, change of role, change of line manager, change of processes, for example. So, you know, doing research in this area is complex, and will we ever get an accurate answer? Because you know, there are those people who know, those people who think they might be neurodivergent, and there are people who haven't actually experienced challenges yet and gone down that sort of exploratory and possible support route. So it is a more sort of complex, you know, it's not straightforward research, is it really? The anecdotal stuff can be extremely useful, interesting, you know, the qualitative stuff. But the actual quantitative is going to be difficult to do. A challenge, but we all rise to a challenge, don't we? But when it comes to, you know, what's going to work, I'd just like to say, actually, you know, my work with Imperial College, being a STEM, you know, academic and education establishment, very attractive to neurodivergent individuals. I work with a lot, you know, from professors, doctors, engineers, across the board. So my experience is, you know, gosh, there are a lot of engineers who are neurodivergent, you know, in whatever field, whether it's medicine or, you know, electronics, technology, across the board, because of the strength areas. But each situation needs to be, as we said, person-centered. But if we can look at the environment and make that more neuro-inclusive, you know, then we're doing, and our communication more neuro-inclusive, then we're doing the best we can for everyone. So there will be more people being able to move forward, optimize, etc. And psychological safety, of course. More people optimizing their potential, but we still need to have a process of support that everyone's aware of, that is consistent, so that people don't feel at risk if they do feel they need to support, because a proactive approach is so important. What I find, and my colleagues find as well, is quite often we're meeting people who've got mental health challenges, and the reason for the mental health challenges quite often, not all the time, and I'm stereotyping, but quite often, is because they're neurodivergent and they've never reached out for any support. So there's not one thing really, but I suppose if I were to say the first step, probably look at your communication, and that's communication across the board. You know, when we talk about universal design, that's what it is really, looking at ways that are most accessible to the majority. It's just that we've tended to think perhaps about universal design in the physical, but we can use universal design across the board.
Thanks, Jeanette. The panel session timing is running out. The sands of time are running out for this panel, unfortunately. But I do want to put one more question to Natasha. From your perspective, I think, again, anecdotally, one of the challenges is that sometimes people don't want to raise the subject of their neurodiversity. Have you had experience of that as employers? That, you know, is there a way to sort of cross this bridge? Because it can be a scary place if you haven't declared to your employer, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think people do and don't disclose for many reasons, right? And I think that is interesting in itself. Like, I came on here today, I've said I'm neurodivergent, but actually day to day, I don't talk about it. I don't tell anyone. I don't feel the need to, because actually it's the way for which I experience the world. So I don't I don't necessarily bring it up. And actually that might be the case for a lot of people. And I think going back to what Jeanette said, it's really important then that we just create a place of work that is neuro-inclusive, and we create everything with accessibility in mind. I think for us, you know, if you think about us at Rolls-Royce, I mean, it's about creating that day-to-day conversation where people feel that they can show up how suits them, but they can disclose these things if they want to, but equally they might not want to, but they feel completely happy being themselves. And so, you know, for us last week we took National Inclusion Week Global, which was a big piece of work, but interestingly we had a full day focused on learning. And of that full day focus of learning, 3 of the 5 sessions was focused on neurodiversity and actually how do we make kind of the day-to-day more accessible for people. So we focused on PowerPoint, we focused on like some of the electronic tools that we're using. And these were all sessions that were led by our colleagues because they felt comfortable and safe that they could come forward and say, listen, I've got some experience in this field, or I've got some personal experience and I want to share that globally, like with my colleagues. So I think it's that for us has been very, very powerful. So that peer-to-peer sharing. Mm-hmm. And then I think the second part for us, so we have a workshop that's been rolled out across all 44,000 colleagues this year around psychological safety. And that for us has been, I think, a game changer in terms of creating that conversation at a local level. So those sessions, you know, they enable people to express their opinions, share their ideas, speak up, but also, you know, they're led locally by the leaders. So the leader is creating that conversation. They are then building that foundation of psychological safety, which will then hopefully move us to a place where people feel that they can share that additional information, whether it is or isn't important to them, depending on how they feel. And again, it goes back to, like I say, empowering our leaders to be able to do this locally, because you can do all you want with an inclusion team, you can do all you want with a people team, and you can have the support in place, but it's the people day to day that are working together that need to be able to have those and use those tools effectively in a local space.
That's great. Thanks, Natasha. That's really good to hear. One of just the very fact that we've got a webinar like this, I think is helping to raise awareness of you always use the phrase challenges and opportunities, but it's about communication at the end of the day, and about creating that space. So thank you very much for your input to everybody. Panel 1, I shall call you. Thank you very much, panel 1. We've given ourselves a very tight schedule, so I will now say farewell to panel 1 and thank you very much. And I'm sure you'll still be listening in. And then welcome to panel 2. And there's a little bit of technical changeover, so we wait for Julia behind the scenes to introduce everybody physically, and then I will introduce people by name. So thrilled to have Helen coming from BAE here today. At the moment, she's the only one on screen, but she's going to be first. Shortly, we will have what I like to call the senior figures from our group, which is Stephen Gill and Andy Ford. Senior is a nice phrase, isn't it? Really, the experience, we could call them silverbacks. We could use all kinds of metaphors, but I won't. I'm just going to say, Helen, you start. Give us your experience. We've sort of termed this the experience at the sharp end group. And Helen, I know you've got something to share, and I know you've also got a meeting to rush to. So let's get
I know.
Let's get you talking.
It's quite all right. I'm neurodivergent. I am a late diagnosis dyslexic. I found out in the final year of my undergraduate. I got my dyslexia diagnosis and struggled when I went into the workplace to get the little bit of support that I kind of hoped I'd need after learning that I could, make life easier on myself, and joined the neurodiversity focus group while it was still the dyslexia network at the IET during lockdown. And also I got ill. I ended up with gallstones and had to get an operation. Pain and not doing all the exercise revealed that I've also got ADHD, because it became a disability for me. Before it was just an inconvenience. That's the point where we realised it was a disability, because it stopped me being able to function properly. So that was a bit of an eye opener for me. But also the neurodiversity focus group was fantastic. I am now a chartered engineer. I was the guinea pig of the group, highlighting where I particularly found the stopping points doing the chartership process. I got some really good advice and some really good support from the neurodiversity focus group at the IET, and I am living proof that we can get our charterships and we are capable people. So yeah, and I'm doing all things like this because it's in my wheelhouse, standing up and speaking. Don't ask me to write an essay, but I am more than happy to talk the hind legs of a donkey.
Okay, before I let the gentleman in, I'll ask you another question, which is really what particular, practically speaking, what particular areas did you have to accommodate for your chartership? What were there some key adjustments made?
It's the breaking it down. I think I had some brilliant advice. I'm going to name check Mamta Singh again because she's just brilliant. She sat me down for an hour and went through, treat it like a project. And it was one of the hardest things to actually think about doing, because it was just this big lump. And it's one of the things, as a neurodiverse person, sometimes I can only see the big picture. I can't work out how to make it into bite-sized chunks. And with Mamta's help, I did. Once I started looking at it as a project, the career manager that IET uses really good. I set myself a weekly appointment that I would sit, and even if I only did 5 minutes, I did it. So these are the kind of things. Writing an essay, writing that massive thing in my head was the scariest thing, and I'm not very good at it. The amount of red pen on my jotters as a kid, it puts you off. There's so much negativity and so much confidence breaking throughout my life, and it's only when you get those positive people in your life, that good teacher that gives you a little bit extra time, that manager who sees your spark of intelligence and feeds it, instead of giving you such strict regimes and time management like pressures and things like that. The people that support you and let you blossom and you excel, and it's little things like that, the positive people that give you that little bit of structure you need, that allows your brain to work the way it needs to do the best it can. Yeah.
Thanks, Helen. Okay, I'll bring Andy in now, because you and I have talked about your story before, but for the new audience, would you like to describe in a very succinct way, I guess, because you have had a career. So are you currently in the midst of a career, should I say? I'm not putting you in the past, sorry. Describe your journey, Andy, is what I'm trying to say.
Okay. It is long now, so I'll try and do it as short as I can. So I'm a chartered engineer. I started off with mechanical engineering. I did a degree in mechanical engineering, and then I entered into the world of building services. Luckily, into a very interesting organisation called Max Fordham's, who they are very open, and they expected you to contribute and discuss things, how the thing was run in particular. And then I got fed up when they decided to try and manage me, and I went off and started my own business. I was 29, I think. That grew from just me and another to about just under 200 people. We then sold that in 2009, 2008 to Mott MacDonald, so I ended up working at a large organisation as an employee for a while, and then at the same time I became a president of an institution, so I became president of SIBSI. And at that point I started introducing the idea of diversity instead of a diversity panel. That was the sort of first bit when I discovered how big diversity was. It got challenging, but it's moved on from there. And then as I thought I was getting to the end of my career, around 60, I then went off to Southbank University and became a professor for the next 10 years. So that was brand new. I didn't know what being a professor was or anything. So yeah, so that's where I've got to. And now I am back to the beginning. I'm back into manufacturing and working on a production of heat pumps. As my company is now making the things, so it's
you're in the thick of it now.
So
you're a bit of a hero to us, because you declared late in life to the world, didn't you, about your dyslexia? So
I did. I was sent on a course when we joined MOTS to be a leadership course, and at the end of that they said, have you ever thought you might be dyslexic? Then they sent me to get tested. So I came back positive, and then I bumped into Stephen, who was busy doing things, and I said, oh yeah, I am too, yeah. That's where I came out, as they say. Yeah.
And that segues very nicely into introducing Steve, who has told me already he doesn't want to speak much, which is why I'm putting the spotlight on him. So we're going to have this rare opportunity. You set this group up, Engineering Differently. Tell us your story. What do you want to tell us? I really want to know about how you've accommodated the dyslexia,
how
what
I've
it's meant
accommodated the dyslexia. Like many others, I've masked it, hidden it, worked to my strengths rather than my avoided the challenges and the weaknesses. And when I heard Jeanette's introduction, you know, the filing of computer file, all the things I thought, oh yeah, yes, oh yes. And you find ways to compensate and avoid those issues, I suppose. So I've had a career of ducking and diving, I guess, and playing to my strengths and speaking a lot, so people are distracted away from the question that they're really trying to ask me, like I'm doing now. So
at least you've identified it, Steve.
Yeah. So it's been like that. Yes. It's what can I say? I guess I've always known I've always struggled at school. I left with no qualifications. I was never going. Engineering came naturally to me, but I'm still not chartered. Although I've helped people go through the chartered process and all that, the thought of going through it is just so daunting.
I think that's an action point that you've now declared to the audience.
Oh, I've declared it.
I see that as a challenge now.
Yeah, there you go. Right. So that's something we've achieved.
Yes, and late diagnosed. Although it came more of I had to do it for confirmation rather than this was a surprise. It was no surprise at all when I was finally diagnosed.
Okay, you've cleverly left a little gap there, because I'm going to go back to Helen in the knowledge that she's got a meeting to run off to in a couple of minutes. So my final question to Helen is, how in your daily life, how or in your engineering life, what's your experience been?
It's been mixed. For me, it's definitely dependent on the environment and the people I'm working with. Inclusive people are just naturally more inclusive and supportive. Old school managers really close that down and hinder and cause anxiety. If I hadn't gone to get anxiety treated, I wouldn't know that I've got ADHD, and I wouldn't know to do all the daft things like have the skates sitting next to my work desk so that I can take a 5-minute skating break. You know, things like that. That sounds bizarre to people.
These are roller skates, Helen.
Yes.
Okay, we're going to see them now. Okay, just checking they weren't ice skates. You being Scottish.
No, I don't have an ice rink in the house, but it's the coping mechanisms that you use. Some of the stuff sound OTT and silly, but some of it's literally just having a weekly check-in with a manager, whereas a previous manager wouldn't speak to me. Like he thought leaving me alone because I was ill was the way to do it, and it meant that you spend so much time with anxiety. So I think it's definitely the managers how to support people and good communication. The difference between me 4 or 5 years ago and me now are miles apart, and it's to do with the fact that I've got a really good supportive manager. I've managed to get some good support in place within the company at BAE. It was slow to start with, but there's been some really, really positive changes around supporting neurodiversity. They previously had trouble because they hadn't acknowledged that they needed a process to support neurodiversity, because previously their disability was done through occupational health. And that doesn't cover neurodiversity. So there's things like that it's beginning to change. We're making really good progress. I just wish I'd known I had a disability when I was younger, and I maybe wouldn't have had the same amount of confidence bashing through negative comments, through constant random. If I passed, it was a pass. And then randomly I'd pass somewhere up here, and then it'd be a random fail. There was no continuity because of the style of learning, the subject matter, whatever it was. If I'd known that I had a disability and we knew to use different techniques for learning, I would have had a different pathway, and I might have found engineering quicker. I was 28 before I started studying engineering at night classes. There's lots of other things, and I feel like I maybe could have done more sooner and reached higher heights had I started earlier. But I also think that with that life experience, I can make the way better for somebody coming behind me, so that they don't have to fight and work quite as hard, because we work twice as hard to be half as acknowledged. And I think that's changing now. But yeah, it's hard work when you're not getting that extra support and you're not able to ask for it, because asking for it can be hard. Being given it automatically, being catered for naturally, allows everybody to move forward. And I think that's the best thing I've learned so far. And hopefully it'll make me a better manager as I move my way up the ranks.
Thanks, Helen. Yeah, I think I'd like to think that one of the consequences of webinars such as this is that colleagues and managers can be more aware of what needs to happen, even if it starts with just a little bit more empathy in general. So
I heard a really good one of if something's irritating or somebody's done something wrong, if you approach it with curiosity, the language becomes better and it's kinder, and it's like, why did you do it that way, rather than you've done this wrong, and all of a sudden you start making everything a little bit better. And it's things like that. It's the day-to-day little bits that make the world a little bit warmer. And I think that's the kind of thing, that's the message, that's the bit that I want to put out. Be kind, and it makes the world inclusive. Yeah. Anyway, thank you very much for letting me speak.
Thank you very much. Yeah, you have to run off. And thank you for sharing. Yeah, thanks, Helen.
Thank
so
you.
we'll continue the conversation. So how have you found colleagues and employers? Either of you two can answer this. You can in general terms. Oh, Andy, I'll go to Andy first. Yeah, how have you found working alongside people?
That's an interesting question.
Yeah, the pause says quite a lot, I think.
I enjoy working alongside people. I suppose my biggest challenges come actually as the organisation gets bigger and I'm less in control of what I'm doing. I thought Helen's comment about passing and then failing and then suddenly excelling is exactly my experience of life, and it confuses the hell out of people because they don't know what you can do, what you're good at. I found the most useful thing that ever happened to me was actually starting my own organisation when I could fill in the gaps that I knew existed in my abilities, and there are lots. That's really lots of people employed, but that's but the thing is, so working alongside people, I suppose the building an organisation that respects people and is open and they can communicate freely with each other and with those people at higher level is it was what caused the organisation I set up to be successful, and possibly the best things that ever came out of it. We used to run sustainability debates which were open to any of our competitors to come to, and they would come along and we'd have a big debate about a topic, and you'd encourage everybody within our organization to contribute because their words were as important as anybody else's. And getting to that point means that people are comfortable to work together, and it's working together and respecting ideas that come forward that is the way to progress. So I found I struggle with being managed. So that's really tricky.
And I think that's
that point.
yeah,
So.
and I think that reflects the experience of a number of people. I mean, some of the groups that we've talked to, when we had a webinar with people in the heating sector, there's a lot of self-employed or small businesses who are installers, and that's because they like to work on their own. You still have to interact with the customers, so that's another challenge. But it's perfectly understandable. So Steve, how have you dealt with working with people?
It's not been a problem for me at all. It's been a nightmare for the others. I don't know how they
say that's not what I've heard. No, I'm joking.
No, I've just, I guess it's always been part of me. So I've always been myself. So the challenges, we all have strengths and weaknesses. Neurodiversity is we're all different. So we all come with different strengths and weaknesses. And my own challenges have been my own. So I've not seen that as a problem. But I can imagine that working with me has been quite difficult. As Andrew knows, with deadlines and other things that are not my strong points, can be a challenge. But what I have found, what really started me on this neurodiversity, neuro-inclusion pathway or route, was when I saw others being treated unfairly. And there was a very specific instance where there was a young woman I was mentoring who was fast-tracked for promotion and went from the tools up to middle management, and was suddenly struggled. This rising star and was being fast-tracked for, I guess, for the boardroom possibly. Suddenly went into free fall, and it's because she was moved into a role that was very administrative, and all her weaknesses or challenges were exposed, but she had hidden her disabilities or dyslexia. And I've told you this story before. I advised her to go to HR and to come out about her dyslexia, which she did. And HR told her basically to look for another job, and it was awful. And I've quickly learned that I have to be careful what I advise people and what we can do. And it is not one size fits all, but we have to raise awareness to get the best out of it. I mean, Jeanette talked about optimizing potential and all that. I've managed companies. I've been on the board of companies. We've always tried to get the best out of everybody because that is a successful business. I'd like to think it's about people. It's actually about being a good business because you get the best out of it, we do better, and we all have easier lives. And when you get more involved in diversity and inclusion, and then I realized that diversity and inclusion was largely looking at visible differences rather than the invisible differences. And then I realized that there are challenges that people hide. It just drew me into trying to help people more and more, or raise awareness about it. So that's been my journey. I've not particularly had many work-related problems, although managing me would be difficult, and I don't like being managed either. But it's just part of life for me.
Okay, thanks, Steve. That was sharing back from my perspective. Yes, there is a problem with deadlines, but I think part of working on these groups together, I as sort of your temporary manager on these activities, I feel that I've learned. So I now know to give you more than one warning about the deadline, and then I cajole, and it's accommodating, isn't it? And that's all part of the.
And it shifts. I love the way it shifts. You used to set me a deadline which would be perhaps 2 weeks in advance, but I quickly worked that out, so I knew I'd got 2 weeks grace. So then it became a month in advance. So it's getting difficult now.
And you still get the "it's tomorrow. Have you remembered?" And I'm always carrying out the sort of pretense of that you might have forgotten. Well, I know fully well that you know what
But
it is.
that interaction is part of the journey that we all
Yeah.
have to go through when working with any individual, whatever the strengths or weaknesses are. It's an adjusting process. It's not a fixed. This is it, and that's it forever. You know, we adjust and adapt as we all progress as individuals.
Indeed, indeed. On the subject of deadlines, we have reached the actual time that we're supposed to finish. Luckily, webinars can go on ad infinitum if we wish, but our employers and colleagues get more cross about that. So I will draw it to a close with my traditional end question, which is, well, what's the one? What would you say is the one key takeaway from your experience, or in fact from today, that you'd like the listening audience to think about? Start with Andy.
I was very encouraged by it, and I'm glad to see large organisations starting to think. And I think probably the thing that strikes me most is that neurodiversity is being discussed openly, and it's not being discussed as a disability. It's being discussed as a positive thing with snags. That, I think, is the truth. It is very positive, but there are problems which just need support. And then everybody's happy.
Excellent. Excellent summary. Thank you, Andy. So, Steve, can you be as succinct as Andy, I wonder?
Impossible. But I will try. I will try. I think, yeah, the thing I found the most encouraging, or there were so many things, but I've got to narrow it down to one, is the fact that we're recognizing that not everybody is in the room that we're talking. The Engineering Council, I think Ben is still on. They recognize that, yes, they can help the members of the PEIs, the Professional Engineering Institutes, to become chartered or to become registered, but they also recognize that there's probably an even greater amount of engineers who are not members of the PEIs because of the problems with. So it's removing the barriers all the way through, which I found is really a great step forward. And it's happening so quickly. Change is happening surprisingly quickly in this sphere, so it's great.
I notice a question has popped in right at the end, so I'm going to cleverly integrate that into my summing up, which is, do you think the HVAC sector's doing better or equal to the rest of industry at the moment? Do you think we're starting to make some progress? That's for you, Steve.
I think we are making progress, and I think the HVAC sector has actually been very accommodating. I think we recognise that we probably have a greater percentage of neurodivergence within our sector, and I think we've worked with it naturally for a long while. And I think because of that, we are a bunch of neurodivergent, dare I say. I think we're more accommodating, and we're moving quicker than the rest.
But as we often say, it's good to talk, and that's the important thing. And I think we've learned that from today. There's been some very good entries in the chat from Laura and others about ways to progress. So do check out the chat. Thank you, gentlemen. I think it's something we're going to return to because I think it's important to, and there's a lot to talk about. So thank you for sharing your experience and to everybody for putting their head above the parapet, as it were. And it remains for me to apologise one more time for the technical issues that at the beginning, which is it only happens once in one's career, so that one's out the way for me. But I wanted to thank you all for joining, and of course to our speakers, to Janet at the beginning for the keynote, and to all of you for sharing. The webinar is going to be available to view shortly on the Elemental website, elementaldigital.co.uk. And if you're not already, please do follow us on LinkedIn and sign up to our newsletter. And then we're away from neurodiversity and into the thick of technology next week when we're looking at heating, energy and water in schools. So I'd like to invite you to sign up to those too. But thank you all. Thank you for all those who are listening, and yeah, do keep the communication going. Feel free to email me. Feel free to email anyone you've heard from. But thank you all, and have a good day. Thanks.
Thank you. And thank you, Andrew, for being such a perfect host. Absent at the beginning. Thank you.
I feel flattered. Goodbye. Thank you. Bye, everybody.